Hey all, Matt Stockton here. I wanted to share something I've been experimenting with today. There's a new reasoning model called DeepSeek R1, which has been released. It's pretty similar to the O1 model in terms of how it works, but it has a couple significant differences. So the first is it's a lot less expensive than O1. So if you were to use the API, the input tokens and the output tokens are a lot less expensive. It's also open source, which means people can use this, download it, use it locally, all that fun stuff. It uses a technique called chain of thought reasoning, which is what O1 uses as well. This generates intermediate reasoning steps, which it calls thinking tokens. But for R1, they're actually available for you to look at and see what's happening. And it's pretty interesting because when you look at them, they kind of mimic a human-like thinking process. They break problems down into smaller steps and before arriving at the final answer. So it's basically like these intermediate steps that help to create a better final result. I've been playing around with this a lot today and found looking at the reasoning token surprisingly insightful. You can actually learn a lot, not just from the final output, but from the reasoning tokens themselves. So I just wanted to do a quick demo and show you what I'm seeing. I'm actually testing R1 locally, so I'm using a tool called LMStudio on Mac, which allows you to run these local models. And that's another interesting thing about this DeepSeek is it's one of the first kind of chain of thought reasoning models that is performant enough to run locally. Like this is an M3 MacBook Pro with 18 gigs of RAM. So it's not small, but it's also not big. And this runs just fine. You could also run this offline, right? Like I could turn my Wi-Fi off right now and this would run, which is also really interesting. And just for full transparency, this is actually a distilled version of R1. I'm not going to get into the technical details, but it's actually not R1, but it's a model that effectively mimics the full R1, but it's smaller and easier to run on this device. So let's go into just showing these chain of thought reasoning tokens, which is the thing that I thought was most interesting. So I'm going to start a new chat here. And like you can see here, it looks a lot like ChatGPT, the interface. That's LMStudio. And it's connected to the DeepSeek R1 model, which I've downloaded. And I'm going to say, how would you explain probability to a 7-year-old who doesn't know anything about it? Give me some ideas of how I can make this concept real for someone who's 7. And then eventually it'll get to the answer, but these are the thinking tokens. And if you kind of read through it, it's kind of like a human's background thread of thinking about how to answer this question. You know, I should also involve the child in activities where they can see probability in action. But it goes on and for a while, right? And this is all leading up to, well, it's going to keep going. It's like watching someone thinking out loud, breaking the problem into manageable pieces. It's walking through its process step by step. And I think, you know, the final answer here, I mean, it seems helpful, but I actually think that sometimes these reasoning tokens can be even more valuable. They provide maybe additional insights or can spark some ideas that you might not have considered from just the final output. And it's interesting because, you know, with O1, it does the same process, but this is hidden from you. There's some information about the thinking tokens, but it's not fully displayed about what it's doing. Let's try one more. Maybe something more applicable for an adult. I'm having a hard time convincing my manager to take a specific approach for a project due this week. How can I communicate my ideas more effectively? All right, so I need to figure out how to talk to my manager about this project thingy. That's funny. It's very casual in its tone, right? Think about what my manager would care about this project. It's for a specific deadline. So it's almost, you know, like a person thinking about that. And I think, you know, for some of these problems, reading through this might be more valuable than the final answer here. And the final answer is a lot more dry and direct and to the point. But seeing the reasoning is actually, you know, quite beneficial. So I thought this was interesting enough to share. Again, this tool is LMStudio. You can download it for free. By the way, this connection here where I'm kind of typing the talk, I'm using Mac Whisper locally, which is a free voice to text for Mac. I use a lot of voice things for all of my tools. I think it's a really nice way to interact with these types of tools. And you know, again, this is free to use. You can download it. You can also use the API. And I thought this was something interesting to share.